Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour, presented by the Cover One Sports Network and Picasso's Pizza. And Dave, let's get the ball rolling right away today. Brandon Beane and the Buffalo Bills, like clockwork. It's like they are fans of the show and want to make our lives as easy as possible. They're always dropping news and nuggets on our lap every Monday morning. This one leaked a little earlier than I think we thought it was going to leak. It leaked Sunday night, but the Buffalo Bills brought back AJ Klein. We'll talk about that in a moment. You had organized team activities getting started, or at least the workouts getting started today, and Nyheim Hines switching his number to good old 0. So a bunch of different Bills news coming in today, and obviously we got our main focus for the show, talking about the first 2 rounds of the draft, what the Bills are going to do with pick 27, pick 59, pick 91. Are they going to wheel and deal? What positions are they going to target? We're going to get to all that tonight. But let's start with AJ Klein. AJ Klein re-signed with the Buffalo Bills this morning on a 1-year deal. What are your thoughts?
As is the phrase of the show, right? For the last month, it does not preclude them from making that a priority position in the draft. But no, it's another one of those signings, kind of like Shaq Lawson, right? Or kind of along those lines, where it's good depth. It's player that has experience in the system. It's a player that has played well at times when put into meaningful snaps, right? I mean, Shaq Lawson, same way. We've seen AJ Klein have his moments as well when he's had to be on the field. Now, what's nice about this signing for the Bills is we know, at least traditionally, they've only played 2 linebackers in their base defense, but it does now open up the door with Sean McDermott potentially changing things up a bit on this defense. It gives him just that added bit of flexibility. And I'm not saying that it necessarily knocks down linebacker all that much as far as a need in the draft, but it does help, right? If the board doesn't fall the way they need it to. It's again another one of those situations where Brandon Beane's not going to necessarily force something if he doesn't want to force it in the draft. And so I think it's solid move for both sides.
And you got some bodies there competing too, because right before the AJ Klein news sort of leaked, you had Tyrell Dodson come out and was sort of pumping up himself and Terrell Bernard saying, "Hey, Terrell, let's get ready and let's get going." It just sort of seemed like your typical like pump up tweet. And then like an hour later, the news breaks that AJ Klein's coming back. So maybe a little drama, a little competition in that Buffalo Bills linebacker room between Tyrell Dodson, Terrell Bernard, AJ Klein. It doesn't hurt to have those bodies there. It doesn't hurt to have that experience there, even if he's more of just like a player coach in training camp. Like say we draft Jack Campbell. You have a guy in AJ Klein who's played this position for the Buffalo Bills and Sean McDermott's defense for, I don't know, upwards of 6 years now too, because he was with him in Carolina as well. So you have someone there to sort of show him the ropes, help him with the nuances and understanding of the playbook and the defense and all the different things that Sean McDermott expects. And if the Buffalo Bills maybe choose to pass on a linebacker, the one thing I said today, and I said it kind of jokingly, but also kind of serious, Sean McDermott had a quality defense in 2017, the year the Buffalo Bills snuck into the wild card playoff spot. His middle linebacker that year was Preston Brown. And the Buffalo Bills were able to have a decent defense with a shoddy defensive line and Preston Brown. And I feel like Sean McDermott was a little bit more involved that year. We saw Sean McDermott a couple of times in 2017 get frustrated with Leslie Frazier and take over play calling. And that was a relatively successful defense. Now you have AJ Klein, who I would say he's kind of comparable to Preston Brown. Is it ideal? No. Could the Buffalo Bills per se survive a season with AJ Klein as their middle linebacker? I think so. Things get murky, as the season progresses, because he's an older player and injuries happen, etc. Like if Matt Milano goes down, you no longer have like Tremaine Edmonds to pick up the slack. It's like AJ Klein and Terrell Bernard or Tyrell Dodson and AJ. So things get a little bit murkier when one of those linebackers goes down. We've seen it before. I'm sure the Buffalo Bills will add a linebacker at some point because, as you said, it does not preclude them. But I don't know. It's a signing. And it doesn't hurt. Dean Marlowe should be next because, again, it doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt. And you remember like the first year Bean came in or like maybe the second, it might've been the first or second year. And it was like, it was the offensive line, and it was like, let's just throw as many
Mhm.
bodies into the mix as possible for competition and just totally
Yeah.
like overhaul it. It kind of feels like, um, hey, adding one more name to the competition, even if it's like a run of the mill type of player, is still gonna squeeze every last bit of like competitiveness, like you mentioned, and every last bit of like getting any kind of competitive advantage you can from that position, adding another guy into the mix for the competition. Because um, whether it's when it's two guys or if it's three or four guys, I really think that the result of a competition of three or four guys is at least going to give you some confidence that the guy that's on the field is going to be serviceable.
Mhm.
So yeah.
All right. Couple other Bills news today. Naheem Hines switching to the number 1. I mean, we're going to cover this real quick here. What are your thoughts? A new agent 0 in Buffalo we got with Naheem Hines.
I was wondering who it would be from the Bills if
Yeah.
anyone went that route. Like part of me kind of felt like there would have been like a sneaky move for like someone on defense to go to number
Yeah.
0, but like Naheem Hines getting 0 is kind of like it's kind of makes sense to me, right? Because you feel like the number 0 is kind of like going to be for a guy that's like an X factor, kind of more of like a specialized type of player, and that's kind of like what Naheem Hines should be in this Bills offense in
Mhm.
special teams in 2023, right? Like you got him doing kick and punt returns, you got
Mhm.
him maybe getting more in the mix as a running back. Maybe we'll see him in as a receiver, and it kind of just like
Yeah.
fits that sort of vibe of the number 0 to me. So
Yeah.
I like it. I like the switch.
I wanted to be a fat guy, but I guess if it's gonna be someone, Naheem Hines is a solid choice there. All right. Now let's get sort of into our focus for today. And before we get into specific players, I want to talk about where the Buffalo Bills are drafting. The Buffalo
Mhm.
Bills hold pick number 27. Are you team trade up? Are you team trade down? Or are you team stay put? Because I feel like we need to have an understanding of where we want the Buffalo Bills to pick before we can really start diving into the players.
I think in most years I'm typically trade down. I think that with the Bills only having 6 picks and the fact that, and I think Greg made a really good point on this show when him and Aaron did their last mock, when you're picking at 27,
Mhm.
you're kind of outside the realm of quote premium talent, right? Um, maybe there's 15 kind of stud first rounders in this draft. Maybe there's 20, maybe there's 10, right? Whatever it is you're on the outside of that, I think. And you will need to get something really falling your way, I think, to get one of these
Mhm.
premium talents if you're to stay put. So for me, moving up to potentially into the top 15 and inside the top 20, that's going to cost a lot, right? If you're going up
Mhm.
for a receiver like a Jackson Smith and Jiba. And then for me, I kind of look at it like, well, there's a bunch of other receivers I'd be happy to get sort of at 27 or even in the second
Mhm.
round at, and linebacker, as we've already studied on this show, feels like maybe it's value lining up with where you're picking doesn't necessarily line up. So unless it's one of those tackles like Darnell Wright or whatever, like I'm kind of team trade down, but
Yeah.
I'm also kind of fine staying put. Like I think unless something weird happens and there's like someone they really, really like that they want to trade up for,
Mhm.
I'm probably team trade down or stay put.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm team anything but stay at pick 27, to be honest with you, because you mentioned it. There are like 15, maybe 16 guys that are really like the bona fide studs of this draft, the guys who have the finger quotes first round grades. There's a real fat chance one of them will fall to 27. If one of them falls to 27, sure, pull the trigger. So then logic would sort of tell you, well, you're sitting at 27, you're going to get like a solid player, but if you can get somebody to trade up and you can slide back, instead of getting a solid player in the first round, a solid player in the second round, a solid player in the third round, instead of getting 3 solid players, you can probably get another like third round pick or so, and you can get 4 solid players in the top 100 as opposed to 3 solid players. So if you're just going to get solid players, you're not going to get that exceptional. You want to have sort of more darts to throw at the dartboard. You want to solidify more positions. So the logical thing to do, especially if the board doesn't fall a certain way, is to trade back. The downside of that is obviously, well, if the Bills see it that way, certainly most NFL GMs are going to see it that way as well. So you hope for maybe one of the bona fide corners dropping. You hope for maybe a Hendon Hooker or Will Levis somehow magically still being on the board. Something where it's something shiny that teams are going to want to trade up for is what you look for. Maybe even Bijan, even though I think it's going to make John Herring in the comment section sad because he really wants Bijan. But more than I think I've ever been, I would totally support team trade up this year because I think you could get to Washington or Tampa at 18 or 19 for this year's first, pick number 91, and next year's third or fourth round pick. Now, I know that seems like a lot, but again, we have a compensatory third round pick coming back next year. So it's almost like a first and a third round pick that you're trading away to move up. And the reason why I say that is because there could still be a player on the board at 18 or 19 that the Buffalo Bills see as a bona fide stud, a bona fide cornerstone player. There are a number of players I think fit into that description that would be worthy trading up for. Peter Skoronski and Darnell Wright are two really good offensive tackles. If you're the Buffalo Bills and you look at Skoronski, you look at Wright, and you see a plug-and-play right tackle from day one who's going to protect Josh Allen better than Spencer Brown, and somebody who 2 or 3 years from now, once Deion Dawkins' contract is up, can kick on over to the left side and become your franchise left tackle, that's something worth trading a first and 2 third-round picks for. If you look at Jackson Smith and Jigba and you say to yourself, I think that this guy can be an atypical wide receiver number 1 in the NFL. He can be an Amon-Ra St. Brown. He can be a Cooper Kupp. It might not be traditional, but he can be a number 1. If you think that that's what you have in Jackson Smith and Jigba, that's worthy, in my opinion, of a trade up into 18 or 19 and giving up a first and 2 third-round picks. And the last one that I would probably trade up for is Nolan Smith. If you look at Nolan Smith, who's an elite athlete, despite the fact that he's a little smaller than some people would like, he's an elite edge defender who's proven it in college. He has all this athleticism. He's a solid all-around player. He just needs help with the pass rush. And if you feel like a guy like Von Miller could do him wonders and Nolan Smith can become this elite edge defender on your football team and stuff the run and do all the right things and rack up 10 plus sacks a season, that's also worth trading up a first and 2 third-round picks for. So to me, there are a multitude of guys, like 4 or 5, I can envision trading up to Washington or Tampa spot for, to making that sacrifice. And if you can get up, like maybe those guys slip into the 20s and you can pay even less, but I would pull the trigger. And I wouldn't blame the Buffalo Bills for pulling the trigger if they believe in those guys. My hesitation right now is I don't know if I do it for Zay Flowers. I don't know if I do it for Jordan Addison because I don't know if those two will ever be more than just solid number 2s. I don't know if they have that number 1 receiver potential, but what are your thoughts on a trade up based on everything I just sort of said here?
Well, I think you're right about going up to 18 or 19. I would I personally just don't see JSN falling that far to me. Like, I don't see how he gets past the Packers at 15. Like, if they're sitting there, like, I feel like it will take a lot to move up for a guy like JSN. For a tackle, that's where it gets interesting, right? Because you have guys like Broderick Jones, Darnell Wright, Skoronski. Like, there's a decent number of those guys that are kind of in that, we'll call it like 12 to 20 range, where one guy starts falling and he's the last guy sort of in your top tier. If you're the Bills, then that might be worth it. The interesting thing to me comes down to like Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison, as you mentioned there at the end, because we saw the Bills move up just a couple spots last year to grab Kaiir Elam when other guys like Roger McCreary and your guy Kyler Gordon were still on the board, but the Bills went up anyway and got Kaiir Elam. So to me, that tells me if they really like Addison or if they really like Flowers, they would be willing to move up a couple spots to go for one of those guys. And we know the Giants are picking there at 25 are probably going to be interested in both of those guys too. So the Bills may have to move ahead of the Giants to maybe pick 24 or 23 if they want to get one of those wide receivers. And in that case, I don't think you're having to give up that third. You may be doing what you did last year and giving up the fourth. And I'd probably be okay with that if they really liked those guys.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what's going to be really intriguing to see how Brandon Beane decides to attack this draft. And I sort of made up my list of guys that I think the Buffalo Bills would trade up for. The only one on that list that the Buffalo Bills haven't sort of shown any type of real like interest in is Nolan Smith. Jackson Smith and Jigba is coming in for a top 30 visit. Aaron Cromer, Darnell Wright is coming in for a top 30 visit. Aaron Cromer worked out Peter Skoronski at the Northwestern Pro Day. That's the sort of the next topic I want to get into is the importance of the top 30 visits in the private workouts for the Buffalo Bills. Because if you look back at years past, outside of Trey White, who had the Dave Aranda stamp of approval, and Dave Aranda, the head coach or the defensive coordinator of LSU at the time, now head coach of Baylor, Sean McDermott, they're tight. Trey White gave him that stamp of approval. Gregory Rousseau did not pre-draft visit the Buffalo Bills because of COVID, but he also had that Manny Diaz stamp of approval. Manny Diaz and Sean McDermott are tight. All of the Bills' number one picks were legitimately like top 30 visits, private workouts. So the Buffalo Bills don't seemingly use the top 30 visits as a smokescreen tool. What are your thoughts on how much we should be reading into all of these lists that we're seeing and these websites that we're seeing and these reports that are coming out of Buffalo Bills top 30 visits?
I mean, I think it's fair to read into it somewhat, right? I mean, the trend is that they typically have picked guys that they've had for top 30 visits outside of obviously interesting situations with the COVID stuff. But I mean, even if you don't read that much into it to specific players and you look at kind of positions that they've been looking at, like they've clearly looked at wide receiver, right? JSN, Jordan Addison, Zay Flower, like they've had multiple of the top talent wide receivers in for visits. They've had safeties in for visits, which I find to be interesting. Obviously, they've had Battle and Mapu in. So, like, you kind of start looking at some of the positions that they've had in, and maybe you can kind of read into that. But it's also just one of many touch points the Bills have had with a lot of these guys. Our guys at C1 talked about like what Brandon Beane and crew were watching down at the Senior Bowl. The combine, obviously, there's a lot of meetings taking place there. So it's like, it's one factor. It is an important factor, right? Because it is sort of part of the trend, but it's just one of those things I would say, don't take it as like solid gold, but take it into consideration as you kind of start to think about predicting who the Bills might pick.
Yeah, 100%. And we have By Chance coming in the comment section. He's saying, "Hey, that's why I'm buying Gervon Dexter at pick 27." He made his his hot take last week when he talked about Gervon Dexter at 27, which is something we talked about, we discussed a little bit, and we're going to have a big conversation in a little bit about Gervon Dexter from Florida because he's an intriguing guy. Like he's a guy that the Buffalo Bills could legitimately take him at 27. They could take him at 59, or they could take him at 91. Like, who knows how this draft is going to play out? And it's so crazy to sort of try to articulate where some of these guys are going and who the Buffalo Bills are zeroing in on, and not just who they're zeroing in on, but where they're zeroing in on. When. Yeah. Like, where are they zeroing in on Gervon Dexter? Where are they zeroing in on Zach Pickens? Where are they zeroing in on blanking Luke Schumacher, Jalen Hyatt, Jordan Battle? Like, some of these guys, like, some people will be like, yo, these guys are first rounders. Some people will be like, oh, these guys are second rounders. Oh, these guys are third. Like, it's going to be legitimately crazy to see sort of draft simulators and draft Twitter versus reality in this draft, because
it's chaos. I love it.
It's going to be absolute chaos. And we're already seeing that craziness and that zaniness around the second overall pick and what the Houston Texans could possibly do. All right, so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to be breaking down the first 3 rounds of the draft, prospects we like, maybe prospects we don't like so much. But before we do, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it's just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. It is not too late to get your pizzas, even if you're out of Buffalo. It's not too late to get your Picasso's pizza, that cup and char pepperoni. It's not too late to get that for your draft day party. All right, so today we're breaking down day 1 and 2 prospects. The reason why we're sort of combining the show this year, last year we did a day 3 show, a day 2 show, a day 1 show, is this year, we just discussed it, the talent in this draft is quite frankly razor thin, from players 15 to about, 75. There will be some surprises on draft day because of that. Guys that we're thinking are in play at 27, as we mentioned, could still be around at 59. Guys who we think are in play at 59 could still be around at pick number 91. And that sort of works the other way too. A guy that we might think is a Bills target at 91 could go at 27 for all we know. The Bills and the other teams may figure, quote, reach for a guy this year, but in reality, that's how most NFL teams view these players, and sort of not the media. The media and the NFL front offices sometimes have quite a discrepancy. And I think this year you're going to see some of that play out as well. So let's start off by talking about the Buffalo Bills' needs. Obviously, when you draft, you're not just going to take the best player available. If Bryce Young somehow dropped to pick number 27, Buffalo Bills aren't taking Bryce Young, right? I don't even know if the Buffalo Bills would take like Christian Gonzalez or Joey Porter Jr. if they dropped to 27. The Buffalo Bills would do everything in their power to trade out of that pick to somebody who wants the corner. Who knows? Maybe the Buffalo Bills would take that corner, but at some point, your needs have to meet, best player available. And that's sort of what we're looking for in this segment here. I can see the Buffalo Bills at pick number 27 going interior offensive line, right tackle, edge. I can even see them going interior defensive line, and most people can see them going linebacker. Those are all in play for the Buffalo Bills, in my opinion, in round 1. The outliers, so guys who might be the exception to this rule, Bijan Robinson, the running back, and Brian Branch, the safety. Are there positions that you're zeroing in on in terms of the Buffalo Bills in round 1?
I mean, throw wide receiver into that mix too, I think.
Oh, I believe
good.
I said wide receiver unless I skipped
okay.
it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I mean, look, I think anywhere on
Mhm.
either line is in play,
Yeah.
right? I think just reality is that the lines are so important. Although Bean hasn't invested heavily in the offensive line early in the draft necessarily, he has so in the defensive line. And it seems like based on free agency investments is this the year that he might be finally willing to take a offensive lineman really high in the draft? So for me, both lines are clearly in play. People are going to be upset probably if they take an edge or a defensive tackle, interior defensive lineman at that pick. But the reality is at pick 27, I put it in the comment section earlier, you need to take, I think, the best player available based on relative need. And the relative need is based on sort of Brandon Bean and where he feels the team needs the most help. If he feels like, let's say, I don't know, interior defensive line and interior offensive line are about the same on a relative need basis, but there's one guy on the defensive line on the board that's head and shoulders graded above the best offensive lineman on the board, he's probably going to take the defensive lineman. So I think it comes down to relative need, how the Bills feel their grades stack up against their needs. They have drafted for need in the past 2 to 3 drafts in the first round, although they double dipped with edge with the Boogie Basham pick. They did need an edge that year, and they drafted Rousseau in the first round. And last year, they obviously needed a corner, and they drafted Kaiir Elam in the first round. So the glaring holes, you would say, are probably at, wide receiver maybe, but it does look like linebacker and offensive tackle to me seem like the biggest holes, and wide receiver being a wild card, defensive line being in the mix. They're all relative needs to me. Wouldn't be surprised at any of those positions.
Yeah. And then once we get into day 2, the second and third rounds of the draft, I think some other positions come into play as well. You see a lot, again, reading into the tea leaves of some of like the top 30 visits. Jordan Battle, it was just one top 30 visit, but you look last year, They visited with a ton of safeties last year, probably because they wanted to take a safety last year. The board just didn't fall that way. So maybe they'll look to take a safety this year, but then you look at this year's draft class, safety's kind of weak. They brought in one of the better ones in Jordan Battle. Maybe the Buffalo Bills look to go safety at some point on day 2. You look at running backs. They've gotten dinner with Roshan Johnson. They've worked out Tajay Spears. They've brought in Kendre Miller for a top 30 visit. So you have running back who could come into play. And then I'm pretty convinced at this point, the Buffalo Bills, I know a lot of people like to use round 4 as a sweet spot for this. I'm pretty convinced at pick 91, the Buffalo Bills are going to take a tight end. There was all that smoke last year. There is a whole bunch of visits this year, whether it's Luke Musgrave, whether it's a private workout with Sam Laporta, whether it's Darnell Washington. I just think there's a lot of smoke this year around tight ends as well. I think the Buffalo Bills pull the trigger, maybe not the first or the second round, because obviously they're not going to use the second tight end all the time. But once you get to that third round, man, I really think the Buffalo Bills want to implement as a way to protect Josh Allen some more 12 personnel this year. So running back, tight end, safety, those all I think get added to the mix once we get into day 2. Maybe a corner if one of the really good ones like drops into the second round, who knows? But what are your thoughts on where the Buffalo Bills go and they pivot after day 1?
Tight end is interesting to me because you could kind of sell that as like a weapon / protection for Josh Allen. So I could see sort of Brandon Beane coming out in the press conference being like, we took this tight end because we felt it was going to help us both protect Josh and also give us an added element in the passing game. Another, like I could see that story coming out, right? If they went for like a Schoonmaker or like like you said, like someone like that, right? Kuntz has been a popular name. Like there are a bunch of names, right? And I think again, people want to say round 4, but if the Bills really like a guy, they're not going to be afraid to pull the trigger in round 3. Safety is interesting to me. We still don't really know what the future of DeMar is going to be. Obviously, we wish him the best in his recovery, and if he plays football again, that's great. You still have to sort of realize that Taylor Rapp's here for 1 year as of right now. Micah Hyde's on his last year of his contract. Poyer's here for 1 more year after this with the 2-year deal he got. But in the twilight of his career, these safety positions, as we've seen last year in real time without Poyer and Hyde, are really important to this defense. And this defense got exposed last year when those guys were out. So the Bills, I think even McDermott with Leslie Frazier gone is going to value that safety position. And we could see a Jordan Battle go maybe as high as round 2. For me, I think it depends on whether the Bills like really, I think it depends obviously on what they do in round 1, right? If they take a wide receiver in round 1, I could see them maybe throw in a chance at taking a safety or a defensive lineman on day 2. If they take an offensive tackle in round 1, I could see the same, maybe taking a safety or a linebacker. Like, so to me, I think round 1 is the domino that will set the Bills in motion on day 2. But I also don't think that there's really any position other than quarterback that's off the table for day 2. Don't be surprised at corner. Don't be surprised at safety. I could see it happening.
Yeah, the Bills have been kind of quiet around a couple of positions. Linebacker 1, I think that's just because they're trying to hide maybe their interest in some of those guys because of the
best they can
that we have. And corner's been the other, like the Bills, other than Darrell Luter, who's probably going to be a day 3 guy. I think he's going to be earlier day 3 than some are projecting. Like he could go rounds 4 or 5. Like other than that, they really have not. And a couple of guys at like the Shrine Bowl and the NFLPA Bowl, like they really haven't sniffed around corners or at least shown an interest in corners too much. But who knows? You never know what teams are trying to hide and what teams want to be public knowledge. And speaking of public knowledge, let's transition now to the wide receiver position in round 1, because the Buffalo Bills have made it pretty public that they are maybe interested in wide receivers. Maybe they want people to know that because it's a smokescreen, but 6 wide receivers brought in for top 30 visits for the Buffalo Bills. Let's start with round number 1.
Yeah.
And I sort of got 5 guys on my radar in round number 1. Now, I'm not saying that we all have to agree that the Bills should take these 5 guys, but I think these are the 5 guys who could realistically go to the Bills at pick number 27. And when it happens, you're like, yeah, maybe I should have seen that coming. Obviously, the 3 main ones, Jackson Smith and Jigba of Ohio State, Zay Flowers out of Boston College, and Jordan Addison out of USC. despite the fact that he's got many critics, despite the fact that the Bills have shown no interest. This is right around the time Quentin Johnston out of TCU is going to be a possibility for some teams. And again, I steadfastly believe that I think Jalen Hyatt can convince a team to use a late first round pick on him. So those are the 5 receivers I'm going to sort of throw at you here. And if you think another one needs to be added, let me know. But of those 5, who has your interest in the first round?
I throw Josh Downs as an X factor, unlikely, but could.
Yeah.
Would it surprise me? No. Would it feel like a swing? Yes, it would. I think the one for me that is really going to be polarizing if it happens would be Jalen Hyatt, because you see a lot of differing opinion on him. I think it's pretty safe consensus that people look at Addison and Flowers very similarly, and feel like both of those guys would be good fits for the Bills. Obviously, visits for both of them. So to me, those would be the 2 guys I'd probably be zeroing in on. But you can't discount Jalen Hyatt because they did have him in for the visit. So are the Bills doing that in anticipation of, hey, maybe if we don't take a wide receiver in round 1, Jalen Hyatt's a guy we could be interested in trading up for in round 2, making sure we get our guy, hoping maybe he falls in round 2. We'll see. But I could also see it as I mean, Hyatt to me is a guy that if you pass on wide receiver in round 1, even if you think he's like a round 3 guy, the Bills might be willing to trade up for him in round 2. So I think your list is sound, and I would just add Downs to the mix as a wild card.
Yeah. I'm right in the same boat with you. Like I'll take any of the first 3, JSN, Zay Flowers, or Jordan Addison. If the Buffalo Bills walk out of the first round with one of those 3 dudes, I will be super happy. I think obviously I've made it clear my number 1 choice of those 3 is JSN. I think he's got an atypical wide receiver number 1 potential, but I think it would be really interesting with their builds to have Zay Flowers and Jordan Addison here in Buffalo. Jordan Addison specifically, because what's the biggest knock on Jordan Addison? It's a slight frame and the fact that there's maybe not a lot of, burst for a guy his size. Like, oh, you're that small, you should have better, maybe agility numbers. You should have a better 40 time, etc. Not that his were bad, but they don't blow you away for his size. His explosiveness doesn't blow you away, at least testing wise. But you look at Jordan Addison and you sort of see a lot of shades in terms of like route running and what they do. It's very similar to Stephon Diggs. So getting a Jordan Addison or even a Zay Flowers into a wide receiver room with Stephon Diggs would be super intriguing, not just from a route running standpoint, not just from a nuance standpoint, not just from like a veteran mentor standpoint, but what happens if these dudes start spending their summers together? We've seen Stephon Diggs over the course of his career, he's reshaped his body. Right? Like he was the athlete that Stephon Diggs is today is not the athlete that Stephon Diggs was when he was drafted out of Maryland. So you look at a guy and you're like, man, I love Jordan Addison, the football player, but I'm not down with that athletic profile. Maybe you get him, working out with a guy like Stephon Diggs over the summers, and he can really, like, this would take a couple of years. You'd obviously have him in the short term as a slot option, as a really good receiver, but over more time could become more than that and could sort of develop into an alpha receiver, sort of like Stephon Diggs. And then Zay Flowers is already showing an ability to do that. And as Tristan Parsons says, he already is more explosive, 100%. My question with Addison and Flowers is like, I always feel like they'll be like elite number 2s. I question whether they could ever knock on the door of being a bona fide number 1 receiver. This is my only sort of question mark. But I'm okay with taking that at 27. I might just not be okay with trading up for it like I would be JSN.
Yeah, and I think, look, we always say don't scout the helmet, but the fact of the matter is like there's a very, very long track record of successful wide receivers coming out of USC. And we know Addison was a transfer from Pitt, went to USC, and did his thing. He was great at Pitt too, by the way. So this is a Biletnikoff Award winner. I mean, like, this guy is an absolute stud. And then Zay Flowers, BC, obviously not known for offensive weaponry, right? Like, you got guys like, AJ Dillon as like premier offensive players coming out of that program, other than like offensive linemen. So it is a bit of an anomaly, but for him to be what he is, what he was in that, for a program like BC that really isn't known for that, to me, it says a lot. And so to me, these guys are a coin flip. I would be happy with either. But I do agree with you. Like I would not necessarily want to trade up for one, but let's say like JSN's gone and let's say Jordan Addison's gone before pick 25. Let's say before pick 23, and the Giants are sitting there at 25, and we know they're going to have interest in one of those guys. Like I wouldn't be opposed to moving up to 23 or 24 with the Vikings or Jaguars and taking that guy if that's who they really liked. I wouldn't hate that.
Yeah, that's true, because that would be like a lower cost, like you mentioned at the top of the show, like a first and a fourth. So I think I would be down for that as well. By chance comes in and says, don't sleep on Raheem Jarrett in the mid to late rounds. Diggs loves him, and he was the reason he went to Maryland. Yeah, Diggs has sort of been like a mentor to Raheem Jarrett. If we're looking for connections here too, Eric Turner pointed this out to us in the Cover One group chat, and I sort of tweeted it out today, and it's pretty common knowledge. Zay Flowers, wide receiver coach at Boston College, Darrell Wyatt, was Gabriel Davis's wide receiver coach at UCF. Jalen Hyatt's head coach / offensive coordinator at Tennessee is Josh Heupel. Gabriel Davis's head coach / offensive coordinator at UCF was Josh Heupel. So if you're looking for some connections, you have those connections, and obviously JSN, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Jalen Hyatt, they were all also top 30 visits. The only ones who are not, Quentin Johnston, which I don't have a problem with, and your guy that you mentioned as sort of a wild card there. Really no interest in Josh Downs, or at least no, interest that has been made known from the Buffalo Bills and Josh Downs. Josh Downs didn't have a single top 30 visit. I thought that was super interesting. I thought that was really weird. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe people are just trying to hide their love.
UNC sucks. That's why.
That's the NC State in you there. How about day 2 and day 3? I mean, day 2 and day 3 is mostly just like, it's like pick your flavor. I mean, some of the names that I have here, and who knows, like a Raheem Jarrett could come off the board sooner than anyone thinks. A Charlie Jones could come off the board sooner than anyone thinks. But the guys I feel confident calling possible day 2 picks, Josh Downs, Jonathan Mingo, who I think could go in the second round. I'm calling my shot there. A.T. Perry, Tyler Scott, Marvin Mims, Cedric Tillman, Rashee Rice, Tank Dell, Trey Palmer, Michael Wilson, Xavier Hutchinson, Andre Iashivas, and Jaden Reed. Those are some guys that I think could easily go on day 2 of the draft. Most, if not all of them, I believe will go on day 2 of the draft. We've got a bunch of people in on Mingo, some Tillman people in here, some Mims people in here. I know Mims is a Joe Marino guy. Who are you high on in these second and these third rounds as someone who would fit with the Buffalo Bills?
I think Kayshon Boutte could potentially go in day 2, but I don't really necessarily have him on my radar for the Bills. I think you mentioned Tyler Scott. Scott and Marvin Mims to me are probably my 2 favorites, with Jaden Reed probably on that list as well. I really like Jonathan Mingo. I think like people, as they've started watching him more over the last couple of weeks, have really seen what kind of player he can be. And I think from like the draft board sites, you've seen him kind of rise up on those. But it wouldn't have surprised me if he was already fairly high in NFL GM's rankings. So I definitely agree with you. Like he's a guy that like a lot of sites probably still don't have as a day 2, but I agree. I don't know if I'm willing to go round 2 on him, but I will be willing to go day 2 on him.
So everyone talks about how this draft class is so small in stature. And that's what's sort of, I think, highlighting and bringing to the surface a lot of these bigger guys. So like you're super excited heading into next weekend. If you're Cedric Tillman, if you're A.T. Perry, if you're Michael Wilson, if you're Andre Iashivas, if you're Jonathan Mingo, if you're Xavier Hutchinson. Why? Because you have, those 7 guys have something that those other guys don't. And that is that they have some size to them, which is something that is sort of lacking. Tristan Parsons comes in and says Parker Washington. He's a guy that is an interesting prospect too. I think his athletic profile might slip him into day 3, but he could easily be another one of those guys because this draft is so weird who could go on day 2 as well. But again, I sort of mentioned at the top, this is a pick your flavor type of draft, right? If you want to take the top off guy, you have Jalen Hyatt, you have Marvin Mims, you have Trey Palmer, you have Scott to choose from. You have all those guys to choose from. If you want a slot only guy, a guy working the slot, you got Tank Dell, you got Josh Downs to choose from. If you're looking for a guy who's going to recreate what Gabriel Davis does on the football field, because you're going to let Gabriel Davis walk next year and you want to have his replacement with a year under his belt already in tow, Cedric Tillman, A.T. Perry, Michael Wilson, Andre Iosivas. If you're looking for a little inside-outside guy, you got Mingo. You've got Xavier Hutchinson. You've got Jaden Reed. And a bunch of people in the comment section are coming in with other guys too, like Bryce Ford Wheaton. Like, again, it's a crazy draft. A bunch of these guys could go. I was trying to pick the ones that I thought were sort of the more surefire ones, but it really is a pick your flavor. What do you think the Bills flavor is going to be? Because I keep hearing it's the take the top off guy.
I think it needs to be the guy. I think it needs to be guys that can separate on their own, right? Yeah. And if that's a guy that can also if that's a guy that can take the top off, and he's not necessarily maybe like a pure slot type, like fine, right? Yeah. But it's like we know based on reading between the tea leaves and kind of seeing about what Josh Allen has talked about in the past is like he likes guys that can get open on their own. He likes guys that can make moves and beat their man. Like separators are what I think I would read the tea leaves into, but at the same time, the Bills could be looking for someone like that to take the top off to allow guys like, Diggs and maybe even Nyheim Hines and Knox to work underneath a bit more. With that said, we have seen in spurts where we've had Gabriel Davis be that deep guy. We have had Stephon Diggs even sometimes be that guy. So, like, what do we really mean by the take the top off guy? It doesn't necessarily have to be the bigger statured guy. Yeah. It can be a guy in that 5'10" to 6 foot range. If he's a burner like a Tyler Scott, to me, comes to mind when I think about that. Marvin Mims comes to mind. Those guys are nice balls of clay because you can do more than just that with those guys. So, like, I would expect that it's a guy that the Bills feel like can be versatile. I think is one, take the top off fine, but also can separate. Like, to me, Mims, Scott, like those guys fit that mold. But we don't know, right? Until the Bills actually do it. Based on who they've been sniffing around with, they've been looking at these guys that are really twitchy, great route runners. And that's the type of guy they've been looking at. So we will see.
By chance comes in and says, I thought I knew the Bills type until they met with Justin Shorter. I wouldn't read too much into that visit because we talked about Justin Shorter a ton on the last show, day 3 guys. To me, Justin Shorter is the type of guy that the Buffalo Bills would maybe want as a priority free agent if he slipped through the cracks of this draft. Or number 2, like say the Buffalo Bills don't get a receiver that they want at any point in the first 3 rounds of the draft. Justin Shorter is like a prototypical X, a guy who can work downfield, a guy who can block, a guy who we just mentioned, you can groom behind Gabriel Davis. Some of my favorites, in this second and third round, I think Cedric Tillman is so underrated. I think Tillman. He's better than Jalen Hyatt. I think he is so comparable to Gabriel Davis, and that's why I don't think the Buffalo Bills are going to touch him, because I do think the Buffalo Bills like Gabriel Davis. I do think the Buffalo Bills would like to extend Gabriel Davis. I do think that the Buffalo Bills aren't going to want to roster 2 Gabriel Davises. They have to replace him. They'll replace him next year. But a team, I think, is going to draft Cedric Tillman and get Gabriel Davis type production out of him. A guy who can, stack and he can get down the field. A guy who can maybe even has a little bit more upside than Gabriel Davis, because I think maybe he's a little less stiff, can play the X receiver role. So I'm a big fan of Cedric Tillman. I just don't know how much the Bills are. If I had to pick a guy on day 2, it's probably Marvin Mims. He gives me like some Emmanuel Sanders vibes. And if I had to pick a guy on day 3, it's probably Tank Dell, because as you mentioned, despite his size and despite the size anomaly that he is, he's just such a quick separator. He's such a crisp and good route runner. So it's Mims and it's Dell that I can't get past, even though I do like my boy Jaden Reed, and we'll talk about him next week on our No Matter What show. I just don't know if the Buffalo Bills are going to have an interesting guy like Reed. Who's your favorite on day 2 and who's your favorite on day 3?
Wow. I think my favorite on 2 is Mims. I'll give him the edge over Tyler Scott. I think my favorite on D3 right now for me, even though I know you... Wait. Round 2 or round 3? Day 2
Round
or day 3?
excuse me, I'm sorry. Round 2, round 3. Excuse me.
Okay,
Sorry
round
about
2.
that.
Yeah. No, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Round 2, Mims. I would say round 3 for me, Mingo. Just because I think he's going to be. I don't know that he's going to go round 2, but I've been really impressed with him. I know it's not necessarily maybe the prototypical separator type of guy, but I think there's a lot to work with Mingo,
Yeah.
and obviously athletically they do test it off the charts, and so he's my favorite. I think from a fit standpoint, it might be Reed. It might
Yeah.
be Reed. So
And, Chris Jenke comes in and says an underrated guy in round 3 might be Xavier Hutchinson. 100% correct. Like I said, it's sort of pick your flavor. Of these guys we just mentioned, Hyatt, Mims, Palmer, Scott, Downs, Dell, Tillman, Perry, Wilson, Iushivas, Mingo, Hutchinson, Reed. If the Buffalo Bills pulled the trigger on any of these guys, I wouldn't be upset. Like none of these prospects, like I would be like mad at or upset with if the Buffalo Bills drafted. And they're also like closely grouped together that it doesn't really matter where they draft them, whether it's 59 or 91. I won't be upset either way.
I feel like we were having a similar conversation for like the Khalil Shakir, Kyle Phillips group last year. I feel like it was very similar. And we saw Kyle Phillips go before Khalil Shakir. So if I'm not mistaken, I think he got picked before.
Yes, he did.
Shakir. Yeah.
All right. So before we head out to our next topic, some connections. Again, Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt were coached by Josh Heupel, who was Gabriel Davis's coach. That's sort of maybe a connection there that you could make. And top 30 visits with these round 2 guys. The round 2 guys weren't getting a ton of love. It was Jalen Hyatt and it was Tank Dell, or excuse me, day 2 guys. So a lot of these guys that we just talked about were not top 30 visits with the Buffalo Bills, weren't guys that we like saw linked to them at the combine, etc. So it'll be interesting to see if it's round 1 or bust for the Buffalo Bills, and whether there are certain guys that they're zeroing in on or they have an open mind, like clearly we do here at the Air Raid Hour. Let's talk about a little bit of offensive tackle, because Spencer Brown, he could be, the Buffalo Bills could be looking to replace him, right? If they're serious about protecting Josh Allen, their game plan cannot be, let's cross our fingers and hope Spencer Brown develops. And if not, we have David Quessenberry there. Like if the Buffalo Bills truly want to have a fail-safe for Spencer Brown at this point in the offseason, really their only choice is pick 27, or maybe cross your fingers and really hope that a guy is still there at pick 59. But tackles go quick in the National Football League on draft day. We know this. Brandon Beane knows this. Looking at the guys who are in play at 27, Paris Johnson is obviously a round 1 guy. He probably won't be there for the Buffalo Bills. Peter Skoronski is a round 1 guy. Again, likely won't be there for the Buffalo Bills, even though there are some rumblings that maybe GMs don't see him as a tackle. They see him as a guard. I think it's a bunch of BS. That could slip him. Darnell Wright, Broderick Jones, Anton Harrison, DeJuan Jones, and I'm even going to throw Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse into the list here as a possible guy who could go late round 1. So pick number 27 or a trade up for the Buffalo Bills, round 1, either way. Who are the guys that interest you? And did I miss anyone? Do you think I need to add anyone to that list?
No, you added Bergeron. I do think he's like more of a, if you want to trade, like kind of like Jalen Hyatt, like if you pass on tackle in round 1, if you want to maybe try to trade up from 59, he'd be a target that I'd be interested in. I think you're right. Paris Johnson, likely not anywhere near the Bills' range as far as like being realistic. But I mean, Broderick Jones, Anton Harrison, and Darnell Wright, and throw DeJuan Jones into that mix as well. I'm not maybe as sold on DeJuan Jones as being the fit, but I do think Broderick Jones, Anton Harrison, and Darnell Wright, all 3 of those guys would excite me at 27 if they were there, right? I mean, if even one, like chances are none of them are going to be there, but if one of them is there, it would be hard for me to pass at that point. And that would be a scenario, I think, maybe in your preference where you might be okay staying at 27.
Yeah. In terms of round 1, I'm definitely leaning Darnell Wright and Peter Skoronski because, well, like, duh, like those are the plug and play guys. And not only do I think that they could plug and play and replace Spencer Brown, I think you're looking at them as the heir apparent to Deion Dawkins on the left side, which is sort of the franchise side. Broderick Jones is really raw. Like I see a lot of people comping him to Deion Dawkins. He's a power player. He's one of the stronger players in this draft, but only 19 career starts. So I wouldn't be mad if they took Broderick Jones. I trust them to develop him the right way with Aaron Cromer here, but it certainly wouldn't be maybe what I would do. I'd lean, like I said, Ryder Skoronski. DeJuan Jones, I love DeJuan Jones. I just don't know if the Buffalo Bills would. He's sort of heavy set. He's sort of built in that Orlando Brown Jr. mold. Well, Judge, Orlando Brown Jr. is really good. Yeah, he started his career in Baltimore, where they ran the ball all the time and utilized play action. Then he went to Kansas City, where Patrick Mahomes has got a pretty quick release. And now he's going to go to Cincinnati, where Joe Burrow is another quick release offense. That's not the Buffalo Bills game. Josh Allen holds on to the football for like a lot longer than other quarterbacks in the National Football League hold on to the ball for. We utilize 5-man protections a lot. I don't know if this is a place for DeJuan Jones to be successful. I think he will be successful if he goes to the right place, and then people will point and say, oh, the Buffalo Bills made a mistake. But I don't know, because sometimes fit matters. And I just don't know if DeJuan Jones would be a fit here. And then I struggle with Anton Harrison. He needs to add mass. He might not be able to start right away because of it. A lot of people think he might just be left tackle only. There's so much upside in Anton Harrison. If they take him, I'm cool with it.
Is he Deion Dawkins? I mean, like, that's what I'm wondering. like left tackle only, athletic guy, like left side only, not the biggest dude. Like,
I don't know if he's got the power of Deion, because Deion's got that thicker build. True. Anton's a real skinny guy, but it'll be interesting. Like, Darnell Wright was the only top 30 visit, so he's really the only connection to the Buffalo Bills right now. But Aaron Cromer was spotted at Anton Harrison's pro day. He was spotted at Matthew Bergeron's pro day, and he was spotted at Peter Skoronski's pro day. So Aaron Cromer has been up close and personal with Harrison, Bergeron, Skoronski, and Darnell Wright, which leads me to believe that those are maybe the 4 guys the Buffalo Bills are leaning towards. Maybe Broderick Jones isn't on the Bills list. Maybe DeJuan Jones is on the Bills list. It'll be interesting to see if they're willing to pull the trigger at 27. If they don't, looking at day 2, Tyler Steen from Alabama, Blake Freeland from BYU, Warren McClendon from Georgia, Nick Saldiveri from Old Dominion, Jalen Duncan from Maryland, Wanya Morris from Oklahoma, and Carter Warren from Pittsburgh. And Carter Warren's got some injury things around him that could drop him significantly. I personally think on tape, he's a day 2 guy. I think he'll go on day 3, but I wanted to throw him in there anyway. Anyone I missed? And to me, there's a significant drop off after Matthew Bergeron. I don't think any of these guys are going to come in and really compete with Spencer Brown.
There is a drop off. I mean, I'm a fan of Wanya Morris. I think that he would be a good value in round 3. I've liked what I've seen from him. I liked some of the scouting reports on him. Obviously tested well athletically. But I think you're right? I think in that next group behind Bergeron, it's Duncan, Freeland, Steen, Morris. Throw McClendon into that mix. Throw Carter Warren and Nick Saldiveri in that list. But I think that, as we talked about on a couple shows ago, there's a cliff there, right? And so I feel like for me, it's round 1 or it's round 3. I don't know that round 2 makes a ton of sense unless it's a Bergeron and you're trading up back into the early stages of round 2 to kind of get that last guy before that cliff. Otherwise, I'm waiting. I'm not going to take a tackle probably in round 2. So for me, that's the sweet spot of what I'm seeing this tiering at.
Yeah, and the interesting thing too is like Wanya Morris, he's moved around a bit at the Senior Bowl. He moved around a bit in his career at Oklahoma. I think the Buffalo Bills could be very high on a guy like Wanya Morris. It wouldn't be surprised me, like you said, to utilize a 3rd round pick on him. Tyler Steen from Alabama. He could be a right guard. He could be a right tackle. He obviously played the left side at Alabama. He's got some flex to his game as well. Nick Saldiveri, right guard, right tackle from Old Dominion. He's got some flex to his game. So these guys in the 3rd round may not be able to compete with Spencer Brown, but maybe you can develop them into a right tackle replacement. And they have that flex to maybe be a really good interior offensive player. I do like Warren McClendon. I think Warren McClendon is being slept on in this draft class, playing at Georgia. I think he's this year's Jamari Sawyer. I think Warren McClendon could be a plug-and-play guy. I don't understand why so many people are sleeping on him. The 2 guys that I'm hesitant on are Blake Freeland and Jalen Duncan. And to me, it's because those are the two biggest projects on day 2. And we already have a huge project, and that huge project is Spencer Brown. So we want to add a project to go along with our project. Like that to me is where I'm sort of out on a guys like Blake Freeland and Jalen Duncan. All right, let's kick it inside now. Staying with the offensive line, let's kick it inside to the interior. You know, my focus, and I think your focus as well, has been mostly on right tackle in the first round. And that's a far cry from where we were Senior Bowl week talking about John Michael Schmitz and Osiris Torrance. But that's what free agency will do to the conversation, right?
We qualify all those conversations with depends on free agency.
So for agency, we sort of lost track of the fact that the Buffalo Bills could still legitimately add an interior offensive lineman as early as pick number 27. They've had a Zoom meeting with John Michael Schmitz. They had a top 30 visit with Osiris Torrance. The other guy who I think could be in play at pick number 27, or at least in the first round, even if it's not to the Bills, I think the other interior offensive player who could be a first round caliber player, Joe Tippmann, is getting a lot of love. I think he could go late 1. The Giants maybe make a surprise there. Look for their Mitch Morse. But if either John Michael Schmitz or Osiris Torrance, the two guys that I just mentioned, are the pick for the Buffalo Bills, man, I'm cool with that. Kicks Ryan Bates into being a 3-position backup. Even if you draft Schmitz now, he can be your right guard and then kick to center in a year or 2 from now. So you got your Mitch Morse insurance. Listen, is it fill the biggest need right now because the Buffalo Bills addressed it in free agency? No. But if the Buffalo Bills take Schmitz or Osiris Torrance, I won't lose any sleep over it.
No, I'm not going to lose any sleep over him. Obviously, I was big on pounding the drum for Zion Johnson last year, saw Jamari Salyer, right? And we saw how far he fell. But the fact is that, yeah, I mean, Skoronski honestly could come in as by chance as be our best. It's possible, right?
That's a possibility too.
I think he's going to be a top 15 pick. Most likely.
I think he gets a shot at tackle because he's a technician, man. He's going to get his shot at tackle. He's going to get his chance to prove it. Rashawn Slater, his former teammate at Northwestern, he had short arms too. Worked out just fine for him.
And I'll say this, right? If it comes down to those guys, I think I'd want the guy that could potentially be the long-term answer at center over a pure guard, just because of like some of the value that you get out of that, right? Especially with a 5-year, 5th-year option, for a guy that you might project to be your center maybe in 2 or so years. That could become really big, right? If they take John Michael Schmitz there with that pick, and if Mitch Morse maybe has another year or 2 left in him, then you have 2 to 3 years of that guy still on his rookie deal as your center and potentially as your starting guard from day 1. So would I be mad about Osiris Torrance? No, not at all, because I'm all about offensive line and protecting Josh Allen. I'm fine with that. But I think if you're going to try to squeeze a little bit more value out of the pick, even though Schmitz overall might be a slightly lower rated prospect than Torrance, he's going to give you, I think, longer term return on your investment than, or at least equal, right? You shouldn't like discount him just because maybe he's not as highly rated.
Looking at the day 2 guys, again, there's a lot of day 2 guys to love, but how long are these guys going to stay on the board? That's the question. It's not a deep class along the interior. The guys who I think are maybe, legitimately like day two guys, Steve Avila from TCU, Luke Whippler, Chandler Zavala, who has sort of risen himself, at least in the media's opinion, to that range. I know Jim Nagy was telling me, like, you're too high on Zavala. He like literally sent me a message. You're too high on Zavala. I'm like, but I like him. So Jim Nagy thinks I'm a little high. But I think Chandler Zavala sneaks his way into day 2. Cody Mock, Olu from Michigan, Emil Ikior from Alabama. And who knows with his injury situation where Andrew Voorhees goes. Does that slip him into day 3? Does he still go like late day 2? Who knows? Because he was a guy who would have been a plug and play player in this year's draft, and he showed a lot of moxie going there and like still going to the combine, finishing it out and benching. I think a lot of teams are going to fall in love with that type of mindset and understand what kind of player they're going to get. Some other names that could sneak their way into day 2 by chance, just said John Gaines tested very well at the combine. Antonio Mafi is getting a lot of visits. Ricky Stromberg is visiting a lot of teams. Braden Daniels is visiting a lot of teams. Juice Scruggs is visiting a lot of teams. Nick Broker is visiting a lot of teams. It just takes one. right? One team to fall in love, and any of these guys could realistically go somewhere on day 2. So just throwing a whole bunch of names out there. But if the Buffalo Bills were to pull the trigger at 59 or 91 on an interior offensive lineman, who are some of the guys that sort of stick out to you?
I like Avila. Obviously, I think like you mentioned, there's a pretty big drop off here. I think after Avila and then the two centers like Tippmann and Weipler, I think after that there's a pretty big drop off for me. I this is tough because I like Voorhees, but like with only 6 picks this year, I probably wouldn't take him on day 1 or day 2. That's just me, right? If he's there on day 3 in round 4, maybe, and you're feeling like you're going to get some value out of that, and knowing that like, hey, we've signed David Edwards, we really only have Connor McGovern and Ryan Bates, like on term, then maybe
Edwards and Bucker are free agents after this year.
Exactly. So maybe a guy like Voorhees becomes interesting for the Bills. I don't know. I think Avila, for me, it's Avila and then one of the centers probably. I'd be okay with I think any of those guys in round 2. Otherwise, I'm probably waiting till day 3 if I don't get one of those guys.
I'm probably waiting to day 3 and like choosing maybe from the John Gaines or the Ricky Strombergs of the world or the Nick Brokers of the world, if they're there, of course, because I just said there's always an opportunity. But I mean, if at the end of the day, the Buffalo Bills in the second round pull the trigger on Cody Mock or Steve Avila or Luke Whippler, maybe wait to the third round for Luke Whippler. There's a ton of teams that legitimately need a center. This is a pretty heavy center draft. Those centers could start to go quickly too. It'll be really interesting, but I wouldn't be upset by any of these names that the Buffalo Bills pulled the trigger on day 2. But I'm with you. I would prefer day 3. All right, let's shift our focus now to the defensive side of the ball and talk about everybody's favorite position, edge rusher. Yes. And this is legitimately a loaded class. When I look at first round guys who could go in the first round, I have 10 guys on my list of guys I wouldn't be shocked if at some point in the first round they were drafted. Obviously, you have your givens: Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, Miles Murphy, Nolan Smith. I can't picture a world where any of those 4, outside of like medical concerns or ripping a bong gas mask. And then I was about to throw Van Ness in there next. So there's 5. Then you have Uzama from K-State, who's a favorite of yours, sack artist, kind of gives me some Jerry Hughes vibes. He is a guy who I think really fits the archetype of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I think he could be in play as early as 19. You have BJ Ojolari, who has a lot of love in the draft Twitter community. Whether that love goes into NFL front offices, who knows? We saw his brother go in the second round. They're very similar players. Will McDonald, a lot of Cedar Bowl love, a lot of hype around him. Derek Hall, who had a Zoom meeting with the Buffalo Bills, a lot of hype around him. And Keon White got an invite to Kansas City for the draft. So you got to throw his name in there as well. He's sort of like a Gregory Rousseau. Is he a DT? Is he an edge type of guy there?
He is a freak. I'll give him that. I mean, I will give him that.
A lot of names that I just threw out there. That's 10 guys. I would have my apprehensions with, I think, Keon White, because he's not the bendy guy, and I've very much transitioned to the bendy guy. Keon White is more like Gregory Rousseau. I think Miles Murphy fits into that Rousseau type of category as well as Van Ness. I already mentioned I would trade up for Nolan Smith, but if the Buffalo Bills were to pull the trigger on any of these sort of bendy edges at 27, I wouldn't lose sleep over it, and I wouldn't be upset by it.
Wouldn't be upset by it. What
are your thoughts on the first round?
No, I think, I mean, edge is a premium position. While we might not be prioritizing it as Bills fans necessarily, like it is a premium position in the NFL. Teams value the edge position. Obviously, the Bills have valued the edge position quite highly in drafts in the past. And so if they're looking to kind of find a guy stylistically that can fill in for Von Miller, Felix, Uzama and Will McDonald, along with Nolan Smith, as you mentioned, are guys that all kind of fit that mold. I mean, we did the mock draft the under review show last Saturday, and we ended up taking Will McDonald at pick 27 because the way the board fell, and we just said, look, for this one, we're not going to do any trade backs. And I'd be okay with that. I really would be okay with that if that ended up happening. I think you're right to say there are 10 guys on the list. Obviously, I don't think 10 guys are going to go.
Oh, yeah, of
but
course
any
not.
but
Yeah.
any one of those 10 guys
Yep.
could go in the
Yeah.
first. So depends on teams' needs, fits, but like, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a premium position. Teams will draft edge over and over again, as we've seen the Bills do it as well. And it's really important.
Yeah.
It's a really important position.
And things could get tempting on, well, first of all, edge rushers and corners are good this year, which could drop some really talented players to us at 27. So maybe there will be more talent on the board at 27 than previously thought. I shot you a text last week, or earlier this week, and I said, man, I'm doing first round mocks where I'm picking the players, not a simulator. And I'm liking things way more for the Bills at 27 when I mock than based on when simulators mock. So maybe things look a little bit better because there's a run on corners, there's a run on edge rushers, at least for Bills fans or from a Bills fan perspective. But things could get interesting for the Buffalo Bills on day 2. And I know with AJ Epinesa and Boogie Basha being second round picks, this is not a great conversation that Bills fans want to have. But whether some of these guys like Uzama, Ojulari, McDonald, Hall, or White, whether they slip, you also have Tuli Tuiapatolo from USC. You have Isaiah Folksy from Notre Dame. You have Byron Young from Tennessee. You have Isaiah McGuire from Missouri. KJ Henry from Clemson. Nick Hampton, I don't know if he's a fit for the Buffalo Bills, from App State. Same with Nick Herbig. I think they're traditional 34 guys. And then the guy I caught a lot of flack for not putting in my day 2 last week, Zach Harrison from Ohio State, who's sort of like a physical archetype fit for the Buffalo Bills. There are plenty of names on day 2. I know a lot of Bills fans will not be happy to hear that because of the Bills' past allocation of resources at the position on day 2. But hey, we took Zach Moss and Devin Singletary on day 2 and then followed up again with James Cook. So maybe we do so again with edge rusher because there's a lot of tempting names.
Isaiah McGuire is an interesting one, right? Because he made Dane Brugler's top 100 overall prospects list. This is a guy who tested great athletically, 9.53 RAS, was all SEC second team, 23 straight starts, finished the regular season, 7.5 sacks, 13 TFL. I mean, he is a guy to me that, if you're looking to kind of thread the needle maybe and not go all the way for, the Zach Harrison like archetype, but you're not willing to go all the way to that pure bendy guy. Like, to me, Isaiah McGuire is a nice compromise and maybe getting the best of both worlds. I don't know if the Bills would see it that way, but like, he's a really interesting name to me. And so, I mean, you just rattled off like 10, 15 names, and like this class is super
deep.
It's been fun to look at this edge class because there are really guys that you can tier into each day that you could get excited about.
A guy I had a chance to watch live and in person last year at the Fiesta Bowl, or 2 years ago at the Fiesta Bowl, before he decided to not declare and come back for his redshirt junior season. 6'5", 264 pounds. Isaiah Folksy from Notre Dame is a guy. Listen, I know the Buffalo Bills are connected to him or linked to him in any way, but he's a guy in the pre-draft process, especially with his 34-inch arms. I think the Buffalo Bills could fall in love with an Isaiah Folksy. I think he fits into that archetype fit. I would not be shocked if the Buffalo Bills pulled the trigger on Folksy at pick number 59. Byron Young from Tennessee is another guy who I think is in that similar mold, where he might not be the bendiest guy in the world, but he's also not the stiffest guy in the world. He's sort of that meet you in the middle type of guy in Byron Young from Tennessee. And a couple of people in the comment section are really high on KJ Henry. I like KJ Henry and I like Zach Harrison. I like them. I do. I don't think I like them on day 2. I'd rather they slip. One of them slips to us, and like if we took them in round 4, I'd be content. I don't know if I'd be happy with either of them at pick number 91.
I think I'm with you there. I think to me, KJ Henry is like a round 4 type of guy, or maybe, maybe someone you trade up for after day 2 ends, and you get on the phone after day 2 and see if you can maneuver your way up towards the start of the board or something like that in day 3. But again, I'm not like advocating for a trade up
Yeah.
for these guys. But like if they're sitting there in day 3 and you haven't taken an edge player yet, sure, yeah, sign me up for that. Just given how many edge guys there are in this class, like I would be a little surprised. I should say I wouldn't be surprised if they took him, but it wouldn't be my first choice if there were other guys on the board.
All right, let's transition now to the interior of the defensive line. And obviously Jalen Carter and all of his troubles still likely going to go in the top 10 because he's probably the best IDL prospect that's come out of the draft in a decade. So we're not going to talk about Jalen Carter. But then after that, you have guys like a laundry list of guys where they each have a trade or two that is really impressive. And then some things that make you question whether they could go in the first round. But I'm going to list off 6 guys who could all possibly go in the first round. I think only like 2 of them will, but all 6 of these guys could. Brian Brzee out of Clemson, Kalijah Cansey out of Pitt, Adetomiwa Adeboariye from Northwestern, who's quickly rising up the boards as a 3-tech, Maisie Smith from Michigan. I'm starting to see Keanu Benton get mocked to teams like the Chiefs late in the first round. And then the guy we're going to talk about in a second, guy top 30 visit with the Buffalo Bills, Jervon Dexter. So pick number 27, defensive tackle. Where are you leaning there? Like, how are you feeling about that?
I don't love it. I think to me, this is another situation where like round 2, round 3, I could get on board. Yeah. Round 1, other than maybe like a Mozzie Smith, I could get on board with maybe in round 1, just because of the fact that he was on a top 30 visit. Great run defender, obviously, and kind of fits, I think, the Bills' archetype of what they've traditionally done at that position. He's not like the super heaviest guy, but he's in the 320s, right? And 6'3", like he's kind of, he's kind of there for, if you think about archetype fits, he's that guy. Mm-hmm. I know, was it by chance? Someone was calling Dexter as
it was by chance. It was by chance.
Yeah, by chance. I'm not gonna lie. I would be a little disappointed with that. Yeah. If that was the pick, especially if a guy like Mozzie was still on the board. Like if you're gonna go with a good interior defensive lineman at pick 27, like to me it's kind of Mozzie or bust. Like Brian Brzee, I mean,
I just don't know, man. Like he's so athletically gifted, and a lot of things have held him back. And Clemson's scheme might not have been the best for him, and I just get it. He profiles really well, but I don't know. Like this is not the most scientific thing, but just something seems off with him. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, but I am not a fan of Brian Brzee.
Yeah, like
that might be the most disappointing. That would be, I think, the pick that would disappoint me the most at 27, and that's probably going to be the pick now. I just willed that into existence.
Well, the more you keep talking about it being the pick, the chances are so you should keep talking about it.
Yeah, like if you're reading the tea leaves, the Bills' top 30 visits were with Mozzie Smith and with Jervon Dexter. So again, why did the Bills bring them in for a top 30? Was it because they were considering them at 27? Is it because they're considering at 59? Are they going to try to trade up in the second round to get them? Like that's the question you start to ask yourself. I'm not high on Brzee. I'm not high on Cansey. I'm not high on Adeboariye. And again, it's nothing against them. I'm just so sick of like skinny 3-techs.
I mean, Cansey to me seems like an edge in a 3-4.
He's at Adeboariye. They're at Oliver. And I get the appeal because the Buffalo Bills might be trying to replace Ed Oliver a year from now. But I'm just kind of over that. Give me Justin Simmons. Give me Chris Jones. Give me Dexter Lawrence. Give me Quinnen Williams. That's what I want. I want the big fat guy. If we took Maisie Smith at 27, I think I would be ecstatic. Because that's sort of where I'm leaning at this point. Like if you're going to take a DT, take the 315 to 330 pound one. Like that's what I want.
Yeah, we're not asking for 350, 360 here.
Yeah,
we just
this is not a Tyler Shelvin podcast anymore.
We want a 3 teens or 320s guy, okay?
Yeah. So yeah, Mozzie's the only one I think I would take at 27, even though I think you could sell me on Keanu Benton. Dexter, like I said, man, this dude could be in play at 27, 59, 91. Literally, who knows? But by chance is right to read the tea leaves there and make that prediction. If you're going to make a bold prediction, it's one that's sort of rooted in some science, right? Like he's a physical specimen. He's a former 5-star recruit out of high school. He's a big, powerful dude. Like he sort of fits the mold of like the type of play. He's young. He fits the type of mold of the players that the Buffalo Bills look for at the 27th pick. He played in the state of Florida, just like Gregory Rousseau and Kyer Elam too. So it's just something that, again, like by chance, I literally think he could be onto something. I really do.
I think
I,
he.
I,
When we
am
do
I
our no
willing to
matter
call
what,
my shots like him? No, but
well, on our no matter what show, we are going to
yeah.
have to predict our final what we think the Bills are going to do in round 1. So it might be Dexter.
And here's where things get interesting, right? Like, say Buffalo Bills don't use pick number 27. Benton could still be there at 59. Dexter could still be there at 59. Now, once you get past those two guys, you start bringing in top 30 visit Zach Pickens, Siaki Ika from Baylor, who's got the Dave Aranda connections, Colby Wooden from Northwestern, Jacqueline Roy, who had a top 30 visit out of LSU, Byron Young from Bama, Jerron Clark from Coastal Carolina, Moro Ajomo from Texas, maybe even like guys like Cameron Young or Jalen Redmond or Keandre Coburn sneak into day 2. Like,
Cameron Young's a favorite of mine.
After that list, there's still rotational DTs. There's still a ton of rotational DTs after that. And that's why, like, maybe as fans outside looking in, we're not so high on like a DT at 27. But what are your thoughts on day 2? Obviously, I think the front runners in the clubhouse would be Dexter because of his visit, Pickens because of his visit, Ika because of his connections to Dave Aranda, and Jacqueline Roy because of his visit. But where are you maybe leaning on day 2? Guys that would interest you?
Yeah, no, Pickens and Roy interest me definitely on day 2. Benton, obviously, there hasn't been necessarily a direct connection to Benton, but it's very popular among Bills fans and mock drafters, which pretty much tells you it's not going to be him. Like, it's just probably not. I think Roy is someone that probably a good amount of people are talking about, but maybe should look in a little bit more to a guy like Roy. I think that, look, he was on a top 30 visit. He did not test well athletically, by the way, but none of these DTs are like ever really going to test that great. I mean, Dexter did, but look, this is one of those weird conversations where it's like, if we talk about picking Dexter at 27, it's like we don't like it. But if we talk about picking Dexter at 59, it's like, okay, we do maybe like it. So it's like, it's just weird. It's like, it's not about the player necessarily in that case. It's more about like where you're taking them. And that's kind of the point of this kind of discussion, right? So Roy, Pickens, I know Randy's big on Pickens, South Carolina guy. I do like Pickens. Obviously, he came in for a visit. I do like Cameron Young. I personally think he's a late day 2 guy. I know a lot of people probably have him as day 3, and realistically, he probably will be day 3. But I wouldn't mind a guy like Cameron Young in round 3 if he's there. Nesta Jade. I like Nesta Jade as well. And then there's the other guys like Kobe Turner who could probably sneak into late day 2 as well. But again, more of a B gapping type of guy and more of an Ed Oliver type replacement than he would be a big, run stuffing type guy.
Yeah. And then there was linebacker. I think realistically, there's no guys who are locks for the first round, but if Jack Campbell, Drew Sanders, or Trenton Simpson, 1 or 2 of them could go. Maybe like Deion Henley sneaks into round 1. I doubt it. So it's really, if you look at pick number 27, Campbell, Sanders, or Simpson, if the Buffalo Bills were to go middle linebacker at pick 27, pick your poison. Who's your choice of those 3?
Campbell. I mean, to me, he's the most ready. I think through the film work that Eric's done on really all of these guys, mostly Simpson and Campbell, he's sold me on Campbell. I think that he can come in day 1, wear the green dot. Like, he just strikes me as the type of guy that, for the few limitations that he does have, you'd be willing to kind of take that, given the glaring apparent need at the position that we see it and the player. Like, I don't really have a lot of reservations about Jack Campbell, so he would be the guy.
Yeah, to me, Campbell, 998 RAS, like athletically, he is a first rounder. There's no doubt about it. People can say, well, he looks stiff or he doesn't look the part. 998 rat. He is a first round caliber athlete. Really, the question you ask yourself with Jack Campbell is middle linebacker a premium position? But to me, if they pull the trigger at 27, he's my guy, and I'm not upset with it because he's a plug and play starter, just like Tremaine Edmonds was. And obviously, you mentioned what Eric Turner was saying. He's a really clean prospect. He probably has less growing pains in his rookie year at middle linebacker than Tremaine Edmonds had his rookie year at middle linebacker. I look at Drew Sanders, and to me, his best asset is his pass rushing ability. He's a work in progress as a middle linebacker. Like when you watch him try to stack, when you watch him try to tackle at the line of scrimmage, guys like running backs, it's not pretty. Like can he get there? Yes. But again, you're taking him away from what he does best, rushing the passer. Trenton Simpson, he's an overhang safety type. His 2022 film where he played middle linebacker was okay, but his 2021 film is what every evaluator wants to point at. Well, 2022 Trenton Simpson didn't look like a first rounder, but go back and look at 2021. That's a first rounder right there. What position was he playing in 2021? He was playing sort of a nickel defender hybrid type. He wasn't playing middle linebacker and he wasn't stacking. So if you take Simpson, if you take Sanders, that's fine. You can probably make them work or get creative or do all these different things. But if you're looking for a traditional plug and play, Jack Campbell has got to be your guy at pick 27. Now, if the Buffalo Bills pass, now we play the waiting game, right? Maybe the Bills try to trade up. Maybe one of these guys slips to 59. Other options on day 2 include Deion Henley, Henry 2020, Dorian Williams, DeMarvion Overshone, Owen Papoi from Auburn, Noah Sewell from Oregon. Starting to see some of these names sneak into the equation as well. Yasir Abdullah from Louisville, Jeremy Banks from Tennessee, who's got a laundry list of off the field issues that I think will keep the Buffalo Bills away, and Ventrell Miller from Florida. What are your thoughts on day 2? Maybe let's take these 3 guys out of the equation. The Buffalo Bills tried to trade up for one. They couldn't get them. They didn't slip to 59. What are your thoughts on day 2 linebackers?
I know you like Henley a bit. I think Sanders on day 2 would be fine, actually. In the last mock I did, and for those people who watch our show and follow me on social media, I don't really put out a ton of mocks. I think there's a lot out there, and so when I do, I usually try to do it with a pretty good thought experiment. And so I did.
He's not like me. He's not like me.
I did take Drew Sanders in round 2 in the last one I did, and I was pretty happy with that, right? Because again, round 2, a little less pressure on that guy to contribute right away. There is going to be expectation that he does contribute, don't get me wrong, but maybe less so than if he is, they quote, reach pick at 27 when maybe he shouldn't have been in the first round. So like the perception and the expectation will change depending on where these guys get picked. So I do like Sanders and Henley as round 2 options. I like Overshone as a round 3 type of guy. I like Dorian Williams as a round 3 type of guy. I'm kind of coming around and really becoming a fan of Yasir Abdullah. I know he's slightly undersized, maybe play the mic, but tested really well athletically, and he can rush the passer as well. So if you're looking for like, maybe you don't want to make the investment in Drew Sanders, but you want someone maybe with that moldability, malleability with pass rush pop, Yasir Abdullah is a name that really intrigues me, maybe in round 3, if you decide to pass on all those other guys. So those are the guys kind of on my short list right now. And Owen Popo as well, another athletic freak. So he's fun.
Benny George comes in and says, who will be the green dot leader of the defense this year? It doesn't need to be the middle linebacker. Matt Milano can do it from his strong side backer position. Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer are on the field at all times. They can do it from the safety position. So I don't think that the green dot necessarily has to be the Mike linebacker. I feel like Matt Milano would take on the reins over a Tyrell Dotson. I feel like Matt Milano would take the reins over a Tremel Bernard. Even if AJ Klein is our starting Mike linebacker this year, I still think they're going to work Bernard and Dodson or a draft pick in, which means they're not going to be Klein's not going to be on the field 100% of the time, which means it would move to a guy like Matt Milano. So I don't think it necessarily has to be the Mike linebacker. I think Milano, Poyer, or Hyde could fill that role. Yeah, the day 2 safeties, man, like I like Henley. I like Dorian Williams. I don't mind Overshone. I like the athletic upside of Papoe, but I don't know,
But
man. Like
and it
other than Henley, I'm just not.
and you
Not sold.
start to think about what are you giving up at other
Yep,
positions
that's exactly
potentially,
it. That's
and
exactly it.
and that's where it kind of falls off a cliff for me.
All right, transitioning now to safeties. We talked about round one. Really, Brian Branch is the only exception to the rule. There's no other safeties you'd really consider in round one, correct?
No. Mm-mm. I mean,
I've heard
Sidney Brown would be the
early
wild
day
card.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he could go in the first round. I just don't think he's going to
Yeah.
go to the first round of the Buffalo Bills.
No.
Uh,
Yeah.
the Bengals have a glaring need at safety. I think Sidney Brown could fill it. Sidney Brown, Antonio Johnson, obviously are some day two guys who could be interesting. Jamie Robinson, Jordan Battle, who was a top 30 visit. Quan Martin, who we know is Eric Turner's guy. Christopher Smith, who we know is Anthony Prohaska's guy. Anthony Johnson Jr. is rising up the boards. And again, I'm just listing off a bunch of names. Daniel Scott, I saw going in round 2 of the new SPN simulator. Ronnie Hickman, Jair Brown, Brandon Hill, JL Skinner, Brandon Joseph. It's an underwhelming safety class. There's only like 5 or 6 guys that I like personally. Bills have shown interest in the two Bama guys, Branch and Battle. Like, what do you make of how the Bills approach safety in this draft?
I would imagine it's like if a guy like Battle is sitting for them in the third round or maybe even the second, and they feel just like Boogie Basham style that he's just so high on their board that they can't pass him up, even though it's not necessarily a glaring position to need. I could see them picking a guy like Jordan Battle. I mean, to me, like he's a fit for what they want, right? I mean, he's a pretty versatile guy. He's got the kind of archetype size, weight that they've had at that position. 6 feet, just a little over 200. But like he is the guy that could be the heir apparent for them at really whatever they want to do. It's probably going to be strong safety, but he's played a lot of deep snaps per PFF as well. So Battle's interesting to me. The guys that it's funny, like the guys that I kind of like the best are probably not fits, right? JL Skinner,
Yeah.
I've loved since day one. He's not really a fit. I do like Ronnie Hickman, but again, what are you giving up in round 3 if you take Ronnie Hickman in round 3 at another position?
Yeah.
So to me, like you said, I love Sidney Brown. It's not realistic for the Bills to probably draft a guy like Sidney Brown, right? Just where he's going to end up getting drafted. So you mentioned the guys that Eric and Anthony like. I like those guys too. But again, for me, the value for me is not safety in this draft. But I could be convinced and I could be persuaded that taking like Jordan Battle in round 2 or 3 is an okay move.
And I'll tell you what too, like the Bills sniffed around safeties last year because they knew that Poyer's contract was coming up. They obviously like the value just didn't fit at any point in the draft last year. They never pulled the trigger on any of the safeties that they pursued. This year, it's just Branch and Battle. So it's to me, it could be a situation where the Bills are like, yeah, we like these two guys, and if these two guys are available in a position we feel comfortable with, cool, we'll pull the trigger. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Bills passed on safety entirely. I mean, for me personally, Branch, Brown, Antonio Johnson, Jamie Robinson, Jordan Battle, Quan Martin, Christopher Smith, who tested awful. And then like full stop. I don't like any Jair Brown, maybe late. Like I have to talk to myself into some of those guys late. Shamari Connor from Virginia Tech later on. Like it's just
Brandon
not impressive.
Hill, another guy, maybe later on.
Again, it's just like it's just not an impressive safety class after those like 5-6 guys that I mentioned. And the Buffalo Bills have really only put smoke around 2 of those guys.
Could that have also been a reason they were like, let's bring back Jordan Poyer? Probably.
And it could have been a reason why Tyler Rapp is here.
Yep.
And it's another reason why I have no problem with the Buffalo Bills re-signing Dean Marlowe as well to give yourself some insurance. But Darrell Luter, the cornerback that they showed interest in, who is his comp on NFL.com by Lance Zierlein? Christian Benford. So you add a guy like Darrell Luter into the equation, maybe in the 4th or the 5th round, you now have a bunch of different guys and a bunch of different chess pieces that you can utilize in your secondary. Maybe you can move Christian Benford to safety because now you have Darrell Luter at corner. Maybe you can move Darrell Luter to corner like you maybe were thinking about doing with Christian Benford, or excuse me, to safety like you were thinking about doing with Christian Benford. So it gives you some versatility. It gives you some options. These guys are probably pretty good at special teams. So maybe look for Darrell Luter as an option for the Buffalo Bills.
He was in my last mock.
I like AJ Finley as well, but again, just like JL Skinner, he's a big boxy type of safety. I just don't trust the Buffalo Bills to use that kind of guy right. I hope AJ Finley ends up in Dallas. Dan Quinn will use him right. When in doubt, I just say a player should be drafted by Dallas because I love Dan Quinn. Send him to Dan Quinn. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have worked our way. Oh, no, we have not worked our way through every position because we still got to round our way back to offense. Running backs. So let's now go to maybe a position the Buffalo Bills will skip in the first round. Running back, unless Bijan is on the board. Jahmyr Gibbs is the other guy with like a first round grade by a lot of people. I don't think the Buffalo Bills are going to have an interest in Jahmyr Gibbs with James Cook in the fold. So obviously, Bijan Robinson, he's a no-brainer at 27, in my opinion. My question for you is, you know that trade I offered earlier, a first-round pick, a third-round pick, and like a fourth-round pick next year to move up to 18 or 19? Would you do that for Bijan Robinson?
No. I would maybe considering moving up a couple spots, but I'm not giving up a third. I could maybe go as far as giving up a fourth to move up, a handful of spots for him. But I'm not giving up a third.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I don't think Bijan is a guy I would trade up for, but I certainly do think that he's a guy I would take at 27 if he were available. But someone said to me on social media today, they're like, listen, man, like Bijan is supposed to be this generational prospect. So if he's a generational prospect, get that like Thurman Thomas type of football player. Maybe he's worth trading some draft capital for. So it'll be interesting to see if that's something that Brandon Beane would think about.
I think you'll see the teams that have 2 picks in the first round. I'm talking about like the Eagles, like teams like that could Eagles could be tempted to take a.
Could you imagine a world? I did a mock the other day. Can you imagine a world where Jalen Carter's off the field issues drop him to 10, and the Eagles get Jalen Carter at 10, and then no one takes a running back, and the Eagles land Bijan at 30? They just had Jalen Carter and Bijan Robinson. Like, just that would be such a Howie Roseman draft. But
yeah.
Speaking of running backs, day two will get interesting. Sean Tucker was medically cleared to work out. Sean Tucker could boost his draft stock into day 2 with a good workout on April 24th. He's a guy we talked about in our day 3 show because of his lack of workouts this offseason. Could be a steal in day 3. He could get back into day 2 with good testing. Looking at some of the running backs, Zach Charbonnet, Devin A. Chain, Israel Ibanaconda, Roshan Johnson, Tajay Spears, Zach Evans, Tank Bigsby, Kendre Miller. Those are my confidence picks for day 2. Could Chase Brown or Dwayne McBride or Kenny McIntosh or Deuce Vaughn work their way in there? Of course they can. I think it's more likely than not than one of those 8 names that I just mentioned drops into day 3. Some Bills connections to some running backs. Kendre Miller came in for a top 30 visit. To me, I personally think that was medical. Tajay Spears did a private workout with the Buffalo Bills, and Roshan Johnson went to dinner with the Buffalo Bills along with Bijan Robinson. So those are some of the Bills connections to running backs. To me, it's those 3 or Bigsby that really stick out as the running backs that the Buffalo Bills were going to take one I'd be okay with to complement James Cook. What are your thoughts on the day 2 running backs?
Yeah, I agree. And I really like Roshan. I think that he's the top of my list as far as like the day 2. He's definitely a guy that there's not a lot of consensus on. Dane Brugler did put him as his 91st overall prospect and 7th best running back, which I think is high compared to where a lot of places have him. So
I think he goes round 2.
Yeah, he has some
buzz. He's buzzing. He's buzzing.
And so round 2 is probably not necessarily smart asset allocation for the Bills, considering they just drafted James Cook, they signed Damon Harris, they have Nyheim Hines, but he's very interesting to me as a potential day. If he's there in round 3, I would be pretty tempted to take a guy like Roshan because, again, Harris 1 year, you can get out of that. Hines now with the restructure, you in theory could get out of that too. But again, it comes down to asset allocation. And do you really want to have to like make these sort of quote unnecessary moves, like of cutting guys, NFL talent guys, just to fit this guy in your roster? I don't know. It doesn't seem like sound strategy, but if they really like him, maybe they pull the trigger. I wouldn't, but
Roshan is this sort of like electric big runner. He averaged 1 less yard per carry, obviously on less touches than Bijan Robinson did his time at Texas. So there's not as much sort of wear on the tires for a guy like Roshan. That's why I think he's a fast riser. If he would have I think a lot of NFL gyms are going to be like, well, if he would have transferred somebody else, he would be like up there in the second round conversation. Just if he would have had more run. Tajay Spears, I think, has just absolutely ensorcelled some people in this pre-draft process. Spears and Roshan are two of my favorite backs in this class. And then the Bills were in on Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller and Tank Bigsby give me some Jamal Williams vibes. So none of those would upset me if the Bills did it. Obviously, I think it would send a lot of Bills fans into a rage, seeing as the Buffalo Bills would then have used their 4th day 2 pick on a running back in 5 years. I think that's something that would definitely not sit well with Bills fans. So the smart move would obviously be to wait and drop into day number 3 or to pick up a UDFA, etc. On to tight ends. Obviously, some first round caliber tight ends in this class, like Michael Mayer, Dalton Kincaid, Darnell Washington. Those guys could all go in the first round. I'm not saying to the Buffalo Bills, but in general, those guys could all go in the first round. It's hard to sort of justify in Buffalo unless there's a radical schematic shift, the Bills using a first or maybe even a second round pick on a tight end, right? Like, I don't think the Bills can justify doing that. Do you?
I'm definitely out on first round. Like if you're sitting there and Darnell Washington or like Sam Laporta really strikes your fancy in round 2, I could get on board with that potentially, right? Like if you say like, hey, we didn't get like one of the top wide receivers, like a Jackson Smith and Jigba or Flowers and Addison, maybe we're gone, maybe Downs is gone in early round 2, and like it just the board doesn't fall the way the Bills want it to at receiver. I could see them saying, well, maybe we're going to go for a Laporta or a Washington to kind of use in a role where they're more of a weapon type to help Josh Allen out because we couldn't get the receiver. Yeah. But I still, for me, it's like round 3 or later is tight end for me. I do like the class though. Overall, I do like the tight end class, top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean Dalton Kincaid is one of the favorite tight ends that I've had a chance to sort of review in a long time. But I live out here in Phoenix, Arizona. I watch a ton of Pac-12 football. I love the program that Kyle Willingham has built out here being in the West Coast in Utah, and watching Dalton Kincaid play football the last couple of years has been fun. I mentioned earlier I had a chance to see Isaiah Folksy in person last year at the Fiesta Bowl. I went to the Fiesta Bowl last year. It was Notre Dame versus Oklahoma State. Obviously, it wasn't a college football playoff game, but there's something about watching football in person. I hardly ever get to sit like up close and personal. And I was up close and personal because it wasn't a college football playoff game. So I got like front row seats for like $75. It was awesome. There's just, when you sit up close and personal at a football game, and some people who sit like in the 100 levels because they have money can probably attest to this. There are some players that just stick out and they're different. When I was watching that Fiesta Bowl game, there were certain players that just stuck out. Michael Mayer, his 2 touchdowns just absolutely stuck out like a sore thumb. Isaiah Folksy had a sack. He stuck out like a sore thumb. Jack Cohn threw like 75 passes that day. Jarrett Patterson in pass protection stuck out like a sore thumb. Malcolm Rodriguez from Oklahoma State stuck out like a sore thumb. Like, those guys stuck out watching that game last year. And I'll never forget watching Michael Mayer in person. I was right there in that end zone where he caught 2 touchdowns. He's a legitimate, he's like, we mentioned it. He's like Hayden Hurst. If Hayden Hurst was really good at football, like Hayden Hurst is just an athlete who could block. Imagine if Hayden Hurst was like legit at football. That's what you get when you get Michael Mayer. And then Dalton Kincaid, he gets those baby Kelsey vibes. Like, I love some of the top end tight ends in this class. I just don't think you're the Buffalo Bills. You can justify it. Like, I can't picture the Buffalo Bills coming out here and running like Byron Leftwich and Bruce Arians, like tight end heavy offense where they're rotating in enough to justify it. I don't see that sort of transformational shift. When in doubt, the Buffalo Bills always go back to 11 personnel. They always go back to 5-man protections. Like they just do. So whether it's Mayer or Kincaid or Washington, or even in the second round, guys like Musgrave or Laporta, I just don't know if the Buffalo Bills can justify it. But pick number 91, man, if Tucker Kraft is there, if Luke Schoonmaker is there, if Zach Kuntz is there, hell, I'd even take Bretton Strange at 91. If one of those tight ends
what
are
if
there,
Laporta drops? That'd be nice.
If Laporta drops, that would be great too, right? Like, so who knows? Maybe I think Sam Laporta is a second rounder, but who knows? Maybe I'm completely wrong, right? So,
it's a good class though. That's why I feel like I'm with you. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. Yeah.
But it seems like almost every single position we're like, let's just wait. Like we got to make up our mind with one of these positions, I guess. But yeah, it'll be interesting. But looking at those day 2 guys, Musgrave, Laporta, Kraft, Schoonmaker, Kuntz, I think Bretton Strange could sneak in there. Davis Allen from Clemson could sneak in there. Cameron Latu, he really gives me Dalton Schultz vibes. He could fit in there. Josh Wiley from Cincinnati, he could slide in there. Darnell Washington was a top 30 pick. Luke Musgrave was, not top 30 pick, top 30 visit. Luke Musgrave was a top 30 visit. Luke Schoonmaker is a top 30 visit. Sam Laporta was a private workout. So it's clear the Bills have an interest in these guys. Day 2, like who's your guys on day 2 that you pull the trigger on?
Sam Laporta, if he's there in round 3, I guess. I mean, maybe you trade up. Maybe you trade up from round 3 to early round 3 to go on. I know Eric's really big on Shoemaker, and I like him too. I think he's in the top 20 tight ends in RAS, like since Kent started doing RAS, like ever. So
he's Dawson Knox to me. He's Dawson Knox.
So he to me, I think the sweet spot for me is taking a guy like Shoemaker at the end of round 3. I think that's probably my ideal. Like I'd love Laporta, but Luke at the end of round 3, I think makes me feel like if they were going to pull a trigger on the tight end and not wait till day 3, I would be comfortable taking Luke in round 3 at the end of round 3.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So now we have done it. We have gone through every single position group. We've talked about all of the players that could be options for the Buffalo Bills. We've talked about trading up. We've talked about trading down. We've talked about where the cliffs are at each of these position groups. So I think we're ready. So next week we can have a little bit of fun. We can do our no matter what lists
and our predictions.
And then on Thursday night, it is finally here, draft night. So next Thursday night, Cover One will be live from first pick to last pick on all 3 nights, day 1, day 2, and day 3. We'll be headlining the night 1 coverage, but it won't just be us. We'll have a whole array of other Cover One personalities, just like last year. So don't be fooled with our logo on the graphic. It'll be a Cover One team effort. We'll just be the ones facilitating the coverage.
And we will be on night 2 as well when Anthony's hosting, and we will be joining him.
You will be. I will be if he lets me.
Yes.
I'm just kidding. Any final thoughts before we head out, Dave?
It's getting close, right? We're getting to crunch time here. The no matter what lists is like kind of one of our favorite things we do all year. Yeah. So it's gonna be fun. And we're gonna have like a consensus area hour, switching things up a little bit
well. This year,
So we'll each have our own, and then there'll be like a pyramid, if you will, to the consensus. So it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. We look forward to that next week. And until next time, Dave, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comment section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!